And maybe that's a maybe that's a development stage for young fella Shedeur. You know, maybe it's just something he has to kind of experience and go through. I think he'll get better, you know, as the season goes along, or as his reps increase, Uncle Ocho. You know what I mean? You don't know the headspace this young man is in, considering the fact that he's coming out and competing day in and day out against Deshaun to try and see who's going to end up being a starting quarterback. But
Shedeur Sanders looked like he was finally taking control of the QB1 battle, but one preseason game may have changed everything. Suddenly, the league's reaction has raised eyebrows, and whispers about his position are getting louder. Was one performance really enough to shake up the entire quarterback room? Who made the call, and what happened behind the scenes that nobody is talking about yet? Stay tuned.
I'm open to any idea that prevents me from watching Shedeur Sanders play quarterback on Sundays. I would rather poke myself in the eyeballs repeatedly than watch him try to play quarterback at the NFL level.
I think that's an insanely hot take.
It's not.
Yes.
He was statistically one of the worst quarterbacks that we've ever seen.
Yeah, and I think I've heard everyone pirate that take, and the truth is...
It's not pirating when it's actually true.
Yeah, but, sorry, parroting it. There, that's a different one. Everyone has said it, and then you actually put on the tape, he really wasn't as bad as the stats say he was.
There is something almost hilarious about the way the NFL treats preseason football. A quarterback can spend weeks competing for a starting job, impress coaches in training camp, make progress with his reads, and earn first-team opportunities. But then one preseason game happens, one interception hits the internet, and suddenly the football world behaves as if the Super Bowl was played on Saturday night.
We've lost sight of what can be the simplest thing, is maybe there's just a bunch of NFL teams that didn't think he was that good. And maybe there were a few teams that were on the fence about him, and the tiebreaker was that he didn't kill it in the interview. And then it turns into all of these other things, like these cryptic people at work trying to damage a kid's name. And it's like, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's not that nefarious. Do you really actually think that all of these people are out to get Shedeur Sanders? Or did the NFL at times, which they're very good at doing, collectively telling us what they think about a player, whether it's in free agency or the draft? And Shedeur, unfortunately for him, with all the hype, is incredibly disappointed.
That is exactly where the Shedeur Sanders conversation has landed. After the Cleveland Browns opened the 2026 preseason against the Chicago Bears, the reaction around Sanders became dramatically louder than the actual evidence on the field.
It's tough. He's still a young quarterback. Trying to figure this thing out, trying to be perfect. And the thing is, it's like most quarterbacks, they feel they can go in there and play the game, be free. He knows he can't make mistakes. It's hard playing like that. Yeah. It's hard. It's hard when you're undermanned, and you know if you make a mistake, Ocho, that might be the difference in Joe. That might be the difference in you. Hell, you might not see the field again.
Facts.
Yeah.
Facts.
But
man,
that's a tough position to be in.
The Browns lost 34-10. Sanders completed 6 of 11 passes for 79 yards, reached the Bears' 5-yard line during one promising drive, went 3 and out on another possession, and later threw an interception.
I would cut Shedeur Sanders. It's always going to look like this. It's never going to get better. And it was always a fake competition. Jerry Jeudy said he wanted 4 because he knew it was going to be 4. And I'm also baking Dillon Gabriel into this situation. I don't know what the Browns are going to do, but they don't need Shedeur Sanders or Dillon Gabriel. And it's the same old with Shedeur, holding the ball too long, not seeing windows close early enough, bumbling with snaps and delaying plays. Like, for instance, right here, this was Shedeur Sanders not being able to handle the snap, dropping back like it's 7-on-7, not seeing the field, being too lax with the football, sailing the football, throwing interceptions. Again, people are going to say, no, it's not Shedeur Sanders.
And somehow, within hours, the conversation shifted from, what did Shedeur show us, to, has Shedeur lost his chance to be QB1? That is where things get interesting, because the actual situation in Cleveland is much more complicated than the headline. First, let us clear up one important detail before the internet turns another preseason game into a congressional hearing. Shedeur Sanders has not officially been stripped of the Browns' QB1 job because, at this point, the Browns have not officially named their regular season QB1. The quarterback competition between Sanders and Deshaun Watson is still ongoing, and head coach Todd Monken has repeatedly described the preseason as part of the evaluation Buffalo. The plan is reversed. with Sanders scheduled to start and Watson expected to play the second half. So when you hear that Shedeur lost QB1 because of this game, the more accurate interpretation is that the media has started moving the goalposts. And honestly, this is exactly what preseason football does every single year. 1 week, a rookie throws 2 touchdowns and everyone declares him the next franchise quarterback. The following week, he throws an interception and suddenly somebody is writing his obituary. We saw this phenomenon last year too.
I think the Browns already know who their quarterback is, and that's why I think Deshaun Watson starting over Shedeur Sanders in week 1 feels so intentional. Mind you, Watson has not played an NFL game since October 20th, 2024, and he's looked less than impressive in training camp this summer. So when I see Watson getting the first preseason start over Shedeur, I'm kind of like, okay, why? Are the Browns genuinely giving him one more opportunity to go out there and prove that he should be their starter? Because if so, he has a lot to do in this game. But I also think there's another possibility here. I think the Browns obviously want the Watson experiment to work. They've paid him a lot of money over the last 4 years with very little in return.
In the 2025 preseason, Sanders actually opened the Browns preseason against Carolina and played well enough to throw 2 touchdowns while completing 14 of 23 passes for 138 yards and adding 19 rushing yards. NFL.com described the performance as Sanders seizing the spotlight. That is what makes the reaction to this preseason game so strange, because the standard seems to change depending on which direction the conversation is moving. When a quarterback performs well in the preseason, the reaction is often that he has finally proven he is ready for the regular season, but when the same quarterback struggles, the conversation immediately shifts toward whether he is incapable of handling the job. Somehow, preseason football manages to be treated as completely meaningless and unbelievably actually happened during the opportunities he received. Sanders entered the game in the second half, which meant he was stepping into an entirely different situation from the one Deshaun Watson experienced earlier in the afternoon. The Browns were already trailing. The game had developed its own rhythm, and the defense had already spent an entire half adjusting to Cleveland's offensive approach. That difference matters because football is not a laboratory where 2 quarterbacks can be placed into identical conditions and measured with perfect scientific accuracy.
I don't know that I am, but I know that I'm also in a position where I feel like months and months of this leading up, and then him having a bad night leads to all of these massive accusations, and then maybe a little victory lapping of like, how could you do this to a kid, or how could you say this, and all this different stuff, and you're just like, dude, it's the draft. It's just the draft, and some guys go later than you think. And sometimes there's a reason. And sometimes in this case, it could be as clear as just a lot of offensive coaches not loving the tape.
Watson played the first half, while Sanders took over after halftime, and the circumstances surrounding those 2 appearances were naturally different. Sanders still managed to move Cleveland into scoring territory, but the Browns failed to convert a 4th and 1 near the goal line, and the offense eventually stalled before Sanders threw an interception early in the 4th quarter. There is no reason to pretend that Sanders played a flawless game, because he did not, and that is precisely where honest evaluation becomes more useful than exaggerated criticism. He had opportunities that he needed to handle better, and there were plays where the Browns would have wanted a more efficient decision or a cleaner execution. However, protections, personnel combinations, play designs, and quarterback responsibilities, and they are supposed to place players in situations that expose weaknesses they still need to correct. If something fails during that process, the coaching staff does not necessarily view it as a disaster because the failure itself can provide valuable information before the regular season arrives. It would be similar to a scientist conducting an experiment, getting an unexpected result, and immediately announcing that the entire laboratory has collapsed. That is essentially how some preseason commentary can sound when a quarterback makes a mistake, because suddenly one bad throw becomes evidence of a character problem, one stalled drive becomes evidence that a player cannot lead an offense, and one interception becomes a reason to question his entire future.
I don't know if this was intentional, but Todd Monken pulled a fast one on us because before practice, he told us Shedeur Sanders it was his day to get the first team reps. Lo and behold, practice comes, the 7-on-7, the 11-on-11s, Deshaun Watson, all that. It was Deshaun. And then what was interesting about the development was that Shedeur seemed to take the fewest snaps with the 2s that we have seen in camp. He shared those with Dylan Gabriel up until probably the last 2 11-on-11 series and 7-on-7 series of the afternoon when it was Shedeur Sanders getting those number 2 reps. But that was hard to miss today after what coach had told us before practice.
The players and coaches inside the building, however, are usually looking at the situation differently. They have access to the film, the practice sessions, the play calls, the protection responsibilities, the quarterback's progressions, and the specific instructions that were given before each snap. A television audience sees the result of the play, while the coaching staff can examine why the play developed the way it did. That creates an important distinction between evaluation and judgment. The Browns are evaluating Shedeur Sanders because they the first-team offense, and the preseason schedule was structured to give both quarterbacks meaningful opportunities to operate with the starters. Sanders also had positive moments during the offseason program, including deep touchdown connections with Denzel Boston and Isaiah Bond during first-team work, which demonstrated why Cleveland remained interested in giving him opportunities rather than simply pushing him aside. At the same time, the Browns have identified legitimate areas where Sanders still needs to improve, particularly his processing speed, his ability to get the ball out quickly, his avoidance of negative plays, and his consistency from one snap to the next. Those concerns should not be dismissed as media inventions, because developing quarterbacks at the NFL level requires coaches to identify exactly those weaknesses and determine whether a player can correct them.
Plays downfield with his arm.
Not a couple.
Every now and
made a
then he
couple per
extended
game.
plays. He was terrible. He had more interceptions than touchdowns. He had a terrible EPA per play, terrible success rate, terrible completion percentage over expected. He was one of the worst players that played quarterback in the NFL last year, and the only reason why he looked good is because you were comparing him to Dylan Gabriel.
That is actually what makes this competition more interesting, because Sanders does not need to convince Cleveland that he is already a perfect quarterback. He needs to convince them that he is becoming a better quarterback. The distinction is enormous. If the Browns had already concluded that Sanders could not handle the position, there would be little reason to continue giving him meaningful first-team opportunities or to structure the second preseason game around him starting against Buffalo. Instead, Cleveland is deliberately placing both 15 passes for 126 yards and helped lead Cleveland to 2 scoring drives during his first half appearance, giving him the kind of efficient performance that naturally attracts attention when a quarterback competition is already underway. Watson also brings something Sanders does not yet possess in the same quantity, which is extensive NFL experience. He has already played in meaningful regular season games, has been a Pro Bowl quarterback, and has operated under the pressure that comes with being an established NFL starter. Cleveland has also invested heavily in Watson, including the fully guaranteed 5-year, $230 million contract that made him one of the most expensive quarterback commitments in league history.
I'm trying to give Shedeur Sanders the benefit of the doubt because nobody in their right mind needs to start Deshaun Watson as their starting quarterback. But I just watched a preseason game against the Bears, and this interception he just threw is Sanders versus the Bears, 6 for 11, 79 yards, and 1 interception. Yeah, Todd Monken probably knows who's going to be a starting quarterback. I'm trying my best to give Shedeur Sanders the benefit of the doubt. I think he got a bad rap last year with the Cleveland Browns because they suck. But now he's overthrowing dudes by miles, and it's the preseason, bro. Like, why? Bro, like I said, I honestly feel like Todd Monken deep down knows that Shedeur, he probably cannot win this.
That financial investment obviously does not guarantee Watson the job, but it does make his position within the competition impossible to ignore. The Browns have enormous resources tied to him, and if he demonstrates that he can still operate efficiently at the NFL level, Cleveland has every reason to take that performance seriously. However, that does not mean Sanders' opportunity has disappeared. In fact, his next preseason appearance could become even more important because Cleveland has scheduled the second game in a way that gives him a different opportunity. Sanders is expected to start against Buffalo on August 22nd and play the first half, while Watson is expected to take over afterward. That arrangement gives Sanders something he did not have against Chicago, which is the opportunity to establish the rhythm of the game from the opening whistle rather than entering after another quarterback has already played an entire half. That difference could matter. If Sanders comes out against Buffalo and plays with greater efficiency, makes quicker decisions, protects the football, and creates several explosive plays, the narrative surrounding him could change almost immediately. The same people who were questioning whether he had fallen behind could suddenly start discussing his development again, because that is how quickly the NFL conversation changes when a quarterback produces a few positive plays. If he struggles again, however, the criticism will become more difficult to dismiss, because a second consecutive poor performance would provide a larger sample for the Browns to evaluate. That is how this competition should work.
As much as I love Shedeur, I would love for him to start. I would love for him to play right now. But when it comes to business, those that make the decisions, and because how much Deshaun Watson is making this year, he will be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. That's it. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. Who you might like, who you don't like. I'm just from a business standpoint. You're not having a $40 million quarterback sitting on the bench because the rest of the world wants to see Shedeur play. That's not the way it works.
It should not be decided by one throw, one interception, one touchdown, or one viral clip. It should be based on a body of work that allows the coaching staff to determine which quarterback gives the Browns the best chance to succeed when the regular season begins. And that is where Sanders has to focus his attention, because he cannot control what commentators say about him, what fans post online, or which clips become popular on social media. He can only control the evidence he gives the coaching staff. The best way for Sanders to silence the criticism is not by arguing with it, because quarterbacks do not win jobs by winning debates on social media. They win jobs by making the football decision difficult for the coaching staff. That means processing quickly enough to avoid unnecessary pressure, taking the easy completion when it is available, attacking aggressively when the defense gives him an opportunity, protecting the football, numbers that clearly show why the Browns still have questions about his consistency and decision-making. Those numbers were not spectacular, but they also came during a difficult rookie season in an unstable quarterback environment. Now Sanders has another offseason of development, another opportunity to learn the system, and another chance to prove that the mistakes he made as a rookie can become lessons rather than permanent weaknesses. That is what Cleveland needs to determine.
Give him a chance, and it's going to be Deshaun Watson. Shout out to ESPN on Cleveland. Shout out to the NFL. The interception was awful. He's 6 for 11, 79 yards with one pick. And honestly, this whole camp, he's looked rough with his throws. And even Todd Monken said Deshaun Watson's been playing better. So fans, I hope you guys are ready, because more than likely what's going to happen is Shedeur Sanders is going to be QB2. Todd Monken's going to give the job to Deshaun Watson. Why? I have no idea. But Shedeur Sanders isn't helping his case with these whack-ass.
And that is why saying Sanders has simply lost QB1 after the Chicago game is premature. There was not an officially established QB1 designation that he suddenly lost, so what may have disappeared is momentum rather than the opportunity itself. Those two things are completely different. The real danger for Sanders is therefore not the interception itself. The bigger danger would be allowing that interception to become the defining image of his preseason. If Sanders struggles again, however, the conversation will become more serious. The media has already started racing toward a conclusion because quarterback controversies are one of the easiest ways to generate attention. That is the strange reality of modern football coverage. One touchdown can create a coronation, one interception can create a crisis, and one average performance can generate enough opinions to fill an entire television network for a week. The Browns, however, cannot afford to make their decision that way. They have to determine which quarterback gives them the best chance to win when the regular season arrives, and that decision requires more than reacting emotionally to one preseason box score. For Shedeur Sanders, however, the scoreboard against Chicago is already becoming less important than what he does next, because the Browns have not closed the door. They have simply asked him to show them why they should keep it open.